Since the world has been the world, humans have used different substances to alter their mental and physical state. Today we talk about one of the most consumed drugs in the world, cannabis or marijuana. What happens in your body in the short, medium, and long term after consuming it? Does it have positive or therapeutic effects? What are they? Is quitting effortless or not as simple as portrayed? Why is a large sector of the population in favor of its legalization? And why is its consumption legal in some countries? Does it boost creativity? Does it kill motivation? Does it raise psychosis risk? Let's look at it. First, what is cannabis? Cannabis is a term used to designate a genus of plants. A genus that includes Cannabis sativa, the most well-known Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis. It is a plant native to Asia and used in traditional Chinese medicine. In fact, it is a plant with a huge historical background, probably being the oldest drug. For example, cannabis has been found in Egyptian mummies thousands of years old. It's a drug that we refer to with many names: marijuana, Mary Jane, hemp, a term that refers to Cannabis sativa itself, hashish, or simply grass. And before delving deeply into the effects of marijuana on your body, it's very important not to confuse cannabis with cannabidiol, something that is sometimes not easy due to their semantic similarity. So what is cannabidiol or cannabidiol? Well, cannabidiol is one of the more than 400 biologically active compounds within the Cannabis sativa plant. The three most relevant, most important compounds present in the plant are tetrahydrocannabinol or tetrahydrocannabinol, cannabidiol, which is what we're talking about, and cannabinol or cannabinol, a less known molecule. Tetrahydrocannabinol. Tetrahydrocannabinol is the main responsible for its psychoactive effects, mood changes, creativity, relaxation, etc. Also, as we will see throughout the video, of most of its side effects or negatives. But on the other hand, cannabidiol does not generate psychoactive effects, it does not get you high nor alters consciousness levels. In fact, it can protect the brain from the negative effects of tetrahydrocannabinol by binding to the same receptors as it and competing with tetrahydrocannabinol for its binding on the C-bone and CB2 receptors. That's why cannabidiol products are required to have a very low tetrahydrocannabinol concentration, below 0.3%, which is the legal limit. Hence, the relative concentrations of cannabidiol and tetrahydrocannabinol in the same plant matter greatly. According to this ratio of concentrations, we have up to 3 different classifications within Cannabis sativa. We have type 1, which is tetrahydrocannabinol dominant. We have type 2, which has very similar ratios of tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol. And we have type 3, which has more cannabidiol than tetrahydrocannabinol, and therefore is used for more medicinal and therapeutic purposes. Recently, type 3 Cannabis sativa is increasingly popular over type 1 and 2. Next, we will look at the different varieties of the plant, their biological effects, the positive effects, and also in more depth, the negative effects on your health. These latter are almost always conditioned by the tetrahydrocannabinol. But before that, I want to give way to the sponsor of this video, Nature Camp, a world-leading brand in cannabidiol products completely free of tetrahydrocannabinol. In the case of Nature Can, what sets it apart from other cannabidiol distributor brands is that it has a broad-spectrum distilled cannabidiol oil. What does this allow? Well, it allows to take advantage of other beneficial compounds of hemp, such as other secondary cannabinoids, terpenoids, or polyphenols, something known as the entourage effect. All their products have undetectable levels of tetrahydrocannabinol, always below 0.01%. Remember that the legal limit was at 0.03%, and this is something that is independently and periodically tested. Their products come from organic hemp plants grown in Oregon, United States. It has the Independent Lab Door certification, an organization that checks for the presence of harmful ingredients in supplements and verifies the accuracy of label claims. This, on one hand, ensures that their products are free from heavy metals, pesticides, pathogens, but on the other hand, guarantees the accuracy in labeling, because this accuracy leaves much to be desired in the market. Sometimes, as you can see in this study of 105 online cannabidiol products analyzed, only 24% had a concentration according to what the label reflected. Alternatively, they use medium-chain triglycerides, coconut-derived medium-chain triglycerides, to enhance cannabidiol bioavailability. Besides their excellent customer service, they offer quick delivery, a broad range of products for Europe, and attractive discounts. And on the subject of just this, if you want to try any of their products, you have the Empodera code available for an additional 15% applicable on the cart price, meaning if there are other types of discounts on the website, then in addition to those discounts, you can get an extra 15% using the Empodera code. Now let's continue with the video and look at the two main varieties of the cannabis plant. Cannabis sativa acutely reduces stress levels and the activity of the amygdala, a brain area involved in threat detection. Simultaneously, it enhances alertness and focus linked to the prefrontal cortex. And for this reason, many people notice a sensation of calm alertness, we could say, when they consume, along with an intensification of the lived experience, something we will talk about later. The indica variety reduces the activity of the prefrontal cortex, has greater sedative effects, and can cause alterations in memory or short-term motor control by lessening the activity of the hippocampus, cerebellum, and basal ganglia. And there are also hybrid strains that combine properties of both strains. However, one of the main problems with unregulated cannabis consumption is that most consumers don't know what they're consuming. They don't know the degree of adulteration of what they're putting into their bodies, and this obviously greatly increases the risks of adverse effects. Now let's look at biological effects. What happens in your body when you consume cannabis for a certain period of time? Let's set it at 4 weeks. When you smoke cannabis, most of the bioactive molecules reach your bloodstream in less than 30 seconds, which is incredibly fast. They reach their peak concentrations at 45 minutes and their effects last up to 4 hours. Yes, the effects of a joint can last up to 4 hours. Be aware that being lipophilic molecules, that is very soluble in fat, they distribute very well through cell membranes and can remain in them for up to 80 days after initial consumption. This is especially relevant for elite athletes who must undergo anti-doping tests. Well, these molecules present in cannabis, how do they interact with your cells? They attach to endocannabinoid system receptors. These receptors were not obviously invented for marijuana, but they naturally bind to other endogenous cannabinoids, that is, those that your own body produces at all times, like anandamide. We fundamentally have two receptors, the one which is concentrated in the nervous system and the CB2 located throughout the body. Cannabis binds more potently to sebone and binds much stronger than endogenous molecules. We can say that when consuming this drug, these cannabinoids take the place of the substances that your body naturally produces because they have more affinity, they bind more potently to the receptors. What is the role of endocannabinoids? Well, these endogenous molecules, the ones you produce yourself, but also, mind you, the ones you consume with the drug in question, are released in the neurons and function as neurotransmitters just like adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine, or glutamate. The endocannabinoid system has a predominantly regulatory action, modulating nerve transmission. All neurotransmitters pass from a transmitting neuron to a receiving neuron in the nervous system. But the same does not happen with endogenous cannabinoids. These molecules are also neurotransmitters, as we have said, but they pass from the neuron receiving another neurotransmitter to the neuron transmitting the nerve signal. And what they do is provide feedback on the neurochemical transmission that is taking place. That is, they work in the opposite direction to the rest of the neurotransmitters, informing about the quality of the signal that is being transmitted. If this seems too complex to you, just remember that the endocannabinoid system modulates things like nerve transmission, pain, or inflammation throughout your body. These modulating effects take place throughout the body because the receptors, I repeat, are scattered throughout your anatomy. Now let's look at the positive effects. Let's examine why cannabis is viewed more favorably than other drugs in some population sectors. First, it helps in stress management. Most chronic cannabis users use it as a means to relax. And it's true, tetrahydrocannabinol develops an acute relaxation response in your body, lowering blood pressure and facilitating a more carefree mental state, we could say. Second, a sense of well-being. Cannabis produces an intensification of the perceived experience, which is usually very pleasant. Other people describe it as a feeling of novelty, as if any experience was a fresh, vivid, new experience that deserves all your attention. If you have consumed or if you consume, you can leave your experience in the comments. Part of this experience is due to the modulation of nerve transmission by the cannabinoids present in cannabis. However, to continue experiencing these same effects, you will need an increasingly larger dose due to the tolerance you will be developing. Potential creativity enhancements. This is a highly debated, controversial topic in cannabis consumption. Cannabis increases the creativity of consumers, although this has more to do with changes in personality and the relaxation response it produces than with direct changes in the architecture of your brain, in the neuronal architecture. Of course, don't think that you're going to become a Picasso by smoking cannabis, but it does seem that it can improve convergent and divergent thinking. That is, both the association of ideas that seem far apart from each other and the exploration of new ideas. And be careful, because this is not reflected in all the studies conducted on the subject, and some like this conclude that high doses even worsen measures of creativity. In any case, this improvement in the creative aspect is very variable, very unpredictable, individual, and will depend on your area of work, your previous experiences, your level of culture, your knowledge, and many other factors that are difficult to isolate. Cannabis is not such a dangerous social drug from the point of view of threatening life as cocaine can be by triggering cardiovascular problems or heroin with an overdose. Mind you, very importantly, I'm not saying that cannabis has no risks or dangers, but that these risks in the vast majority of consumers are not fatal, as other drugs can be. And finally, it has some therapeutic and medicinal effects. Some countries have legalized the use of marijuana due to its therapeutic and medicinal effects, and also due to pressure from a certain sector of the population. However, it's important not to overstate its effects. So let's see what real benefits with scientific evidence cannabis presents for health. First, reduced pain in chronic conditions like cancer. Also, a reduction in intraocular pressure, something important in pathologies such as glaucoma. Appetite increases in conditions where it normally decreases, like cachexia often seen in advanced stages of various cancers. An anti-epileptic effect. In fact, the few drugs that contain tetrahydrocannabinol and are approved by the Food and Drug Administration are indicated in hard-to-control epilepsies. The reduction in glutamatergic signaling through the activation of the C-bone receptor is the main mechanism described. They also reduce neuronal hyperexcitability, and this decreases the number of seizure episodes. In preclinical studies in animals, tetrahydrocannabinol has shown some anti-atherosclerotic effect even at low doses. Does the same happen in humans? We don't know, but it seems that the activation of CB2 by tetrahydrocannabinol reduces the ability of oxidized, low-density lipoprotein cholesterol to enter macrophages and form atheroma plaque. And now let's deeply assess the negative effects of cannabis on your health. Let's not fool ourselves. As of today, the negative effects of chronic cannabis use outweigh the potential positive effects. In fact, having successfully isolated cannabidiol, the molecule responsible for its positive effects, I find it completely unnecessary to consume tetrahydrocannabinol for therapeutic reasons. If we talk about the psychoactive effects, the social effects, the recreational effects, then it's a completely different matter. Something very important to consider, although not all effects are dose dependent, most of those collected here do occur more frequently and with greater intensity with higher doses and with prolonged use over time, that is, with chronic use. First, psychosis and paranoia. One of the most negative and disturbing elements of cannabis is that we do not have predictive tools for your response to it, and in a small percentage of consumers, it increases the risk of psychosis and paranoid ideation, both acutely and chronically. This is one of the main problems with these molecules. Effects vary among individuals, with factors like genetics and past experiences significantly altering the response. In any case, if there are serious mental health problems like schizophrenia in your family, avoid the use of cannabis at all costs. It's a superb recommendation. Interestingly, the effect that cannabis has on you will always be the same in your particular case, whether it increases alertness levels, makes you more paranoid, relaxes you, etc. As long as you don't change the type or variety of plant or product, of course. Alterations in language production. Have you ever noticed that heavy cannabis users have an impoverished language? Well, this is no coincidence. Chronic consumption can modify the intonation of language, vocalization, and even the variety of vocabulary used. Indeed, there will always be cultured individuals like Antonio Escotado who use cannabis and defy the norm. May he rest in peace. Smoking cannabis, like smoking tobacco, generates secondary carcinogens from the combustion of organic material. This elevates the risk of lung cancer and other diseases like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, just like traditional tobacco. Negative effects on memory. By reducing the activity of the hippocampus responsible for short-term memory, this can be altered. However, it does not affect the ability for long-term memory, that is, to remember things that happened a long time ago. And its effects on short-term memory are usually very transient. This is more true for indica varieties than for sativa varieties. Effects on anxiety. It increases the risk of anxiety disorders. Although cannabis is popularly consumed to relax, the reality is that it greatly increases the risk of anxiety and panic attacks throughout life in the moments following its consumption. You can relax temporarily, but it may increase your long-term anxiety risk. In this way, many consumers get trapped in a very dangerous cycle in which they alternate periods of intense anxiety with cannabis use to calm that anxiety, which in turn increases the risk of future anxiety, which they calm with more cannabis. A very dangerous cycle. Also an increase in the risk of depression. Cannabis use quadruples the risk of major depression. Frequently, people with depression also use this and other substances, intensifying the issue. Cannabis impacts movement-regulating areas like the cerebellum and basal ganglia, leading to less physical activity. Therefore, many consumers start to move less and gain weight, to which the relaxation effect and the influence on dopamine and motivation contribute. We'll see alterations in neurodevelopment later. As previously mentioned, cannabidiol and tetrahydrocannabinol bind to fetal sebone and CBT2 receptors, thus cannabis use during pregnancy must be strictly avoided. And also until there are studies that support the safety, also the use of cannabidiol during pregnancy. But neurodevelopment does not end at birth, it continues for many more years. And the brain of a teenager is still in full development, constantly establishing and eliminating neuronal connections. We know that teenagers are much more likely to have negative side effects with the use of cannabis. And also that its use at this stage of life conditions a higher risk of mental health problems in the future, such as depression or anxiety. Red eyes and dry mouth after smoking cannabis result from tetrahydrocannabinol binding to sebone and CB2 receptors in the mouth and eyes, reducing tear and saliva production. Chronic cannabis use in developing brains, such as those of children and adolescents, tints the brain's gray matter, elevating the risk of mood disorders, psychotic incidents, and depression. In the white matter, the strong activation of sebone receptors implicated in these disorders regulates nerve transmission. What is even more worrying is that this risk is increased many years after stopping consumption. Its effects on certain neuronal groups in the hypothalamus facilitate cravings for certain foods or food groups, especially carbohydrates. Cannabis generally contributes to weight gain via various mechanisms. It also increases the production of ghrelin hormone and orexigenic hormone, that is, it increases appetite. Simultaneously, it lowers the levels of appetite-reducing hormones like peptide YY, reduced libido, and elevated prolactin. Cannabis significantly boosts prolactin levels. Prolactin is a hormone whose levels, interestingly, are indirectly proportional to those of dopamine. High prolactin inhibits dopamine, and high dopamine inhibits prolactin. In fact, we often give dopaminergic agonists to treat high prolactin problems that we see in my specialty, which is another topic altogether. And this has a lot to do with the amotivational syndromes seen in cannabis users. Also, high prolactin reduces libido and can lead to hypogonadism, that is, a decrease in the production of sexual hormones. So you can have other erectile dysfunction problems with cannabis use. Up to 10% of consumers have hypoactive sexual desire. Meanwhile, chronic intake increases the aromatase enzyme, converting testosterone to estrogen, causing gynecomastia in males. Cannabis generates some withdrawal, with the most frequent symptoms upon discontinuing its use being anxiety, irritability, anger for weeks. These symptoms usually last for weeks after stopping its use. One may also experience nausea, depression, or insomnia. However, compared to tobacco, opioids, or cocaine, it's a drug that causes less dependence. It can cause alterations in fertility as it alters sperm motility. It can cause hormonal alterations. In fact, tetrahydrocannabinol, but not cannabidiol, inhibits gonadotropin-releasing hormone, the hormone responsible for stimulating the pituitary to produce LH and follicle-stimulating hormone, which in turn are responsible for producing sex hormones, testosterone, and estrogen in the testicles and ovaries, respectively. Wow, high doses of tetrahydrocannabinol inhibit the hypothalamus-pituitary-gonadal axis and can cause hypogonadism. And that's it for today's video, guys. Now you have more information about both the positive and negative aspects of cannabis use. And knowledge is power, and you can use this knowledge to make better decisions about your health. Leave your questions in the comments, and I remind you that with the Empower code, you can get a 15% discount on any cannabidiol product from Nature Camp. Big hug, see you soon, keep empowering.